Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's session in conversation with Christos Tsiolkas. My name is Mick Layden. I'm here from the Mary Carer Services team. Just before we get things underway, we'll just cover off a couple of little digital housekeeping issues. You will notice that you will have joined the session on mute, just to make sure that we don't have background noise coming through and to make sure that everyone can really hear nice and clearly. We'll keep all of you on mute. However, we really do encourage you to ask questions and to get involved. And at the end of the formal conversation component, we will have an opportunity to ask your questions. So if you use the chat function, which you can see, if you move your mouse over the screen, or if you're on your phone, just tap the screen, you'll see a little chat button. You can type in there, and I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the session, and we'll collate those questions. We'll get through as many as we possibly can in the time that we've got. If you have any other questions or you run into anything else, please feel free to message me in the little chat box. You can pick me, I'm under Mary Health in there, so you can pick me and message me directly, and I can help you out if you have any other problems. So without any further to do, I'll hand over to our General Manager of Healthy Communities, Marianne Taddick, who will introduce the session. Thanks, Marianne.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Mick. Thank you everyone else for tuning in today. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, and I know I'm dialing in from Wurundjeri land today, and many of our Mary Carer Services staff and officers may be, but also aware that we've probably got people dialing in from a whole range of places virtually at the moment. So I would like to pay my respects to Aboriginal traditional custodians across Victoria, and all elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that might be tuning in and with us here today. So I've got the pleasure of introducing Christos today. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us on this special week for Carers Week. Christos Tsiolkas is the author of the novels Loaded, The Jesus Man, Dead Europe, Barracuda, The Slap and Damascus, as well as a short story collection, Merciless Gods. He's co-authored the dialogue Jump Cuts, an autobiography with Sasha Soldato, and wrote a monograph on Fred Scapisi's The Devil's Playground for the Australian Screen Classic series. Christos has also written the monograph on Patrick White for the Writers on Writers series, and his books have been translated in over 22 languages and have been adapted for film, television and for the stage. Christos is also a playwright, essayist, screenwriter and the film critic for the Saturday paper. He became patron of Writers Victoria in 2017 and is also an ambassador for the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. Christos is also a proud long-term member of the Richmond Football Club. So welcome, thank you so much for joining us, Christos. I'd now like to hand over to Margie. Margie's one of our carer health coaches here at Mary Health and will be facilitating the conversation with Christos today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Welcome, Christos.
I'm just wondering, all the non-Tiger supporters have logged off now.
Ha ha. During this Carers Week, Christos, a quote to reflect on is that anyone at any time may need to become a carer, and any one of us at any time may need to be cared for. It is part of the life cycle. So being Carers Week and people tuning in today will be predominantly carers. Just wondering if you have known anyone or if you have had experience yourself of caring for a family member or a friend.
Oh, look, the first thing that comes to mind, Margie, and we should say to people, you know, you and I go back, way back, right?
Yeah.
We met when I was 17, so that's a long time ago now.
Yeah.
I think in that sense of when my father got, about 9 years ago now, got diagnosed with cancer, the illness that eventually, took him. And it was really over that period, that year of, I really felt that sense of responsibility I had. My father was a really good man. You know, it was not always an easy relationship because I made decisions quite young that were not, he just didn't understand it. He was a migrant man from a very different world to the one I grew up in. But he was always generous and loving to myself, to my brother, to my cousins, you know, to his family. So it felt absolutely right. Because I'm a writer, I have much more flexibility in terms of my work life than for my brother, for example, who also did an enormous share. And I also knew that there was a burden for my mother as well. You know, for anyone who's listening to this who has had to take care of someone who is in the final stage of cancer knows how difficult that can be. I found that probably the most enriching experience of my life.
Okay.
It was also a way of saying thank you to my father, to say thank you for the sacrifices he'd made, you know, he never had the opportunities, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about money, of being in the world that I had, and they all arose from the work he and my mother did. And my father was that generation too, a Greek man who he loved telling stories. And I think, you know, I owe my storytelling gifts to him and my mother, really. I mean, they're both wonderful storytellers. And he painted these worlds for me of growing up in the village and growing up during war and civil war that have entered my writing now. But he always made it magical. So in those months together, it wasn't that he found having those direct emotional talks really difficult, but it was the simple things that were important, things like cutting his hair, washing him. I realised in those moments that a lot can be communicated without words. You know, I think that's pivotal in terms of care. I've also, and I'm being cautious here because I don't want, you know, people's lives are people's lives. But when I was younger, there was someone I deeply love who was battling mental health problems, and that's, you know, that was a lesson in terms of having to really listen to someone and understand their experience, and also I think a lesson of having to the tendency I found, I'll speak for myself, is going, oh, I'm going to blame myself, it must be somehow my fault, and them really teaching me sometimes depression happens. Sometimes you can be bipolar. Sometimes you can suffer these conditions, and it's not about aligning. It's not about fault. That the best for me to do as someone who loved this person and take to be there in a carer role, because it was a role, is actually just to listen and not make it about myself.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing, Christos. I think there'd be a lot of people today that could relate to a lot of that as well. Yeah. I'm just wondering, we probably should have asked this at the beginning, how have you been during lockdown? I guess most of us are in lockdown in Melbourne, at least, with the pandemic and that. How are you tracking during this time?
Margie, I keep saying this because it is true. I feel really fortunate. So Wayne, my partner, we have a beautiful, you know, we have a home we love. So kind of, it's been, we live in a really good neighbourhood. I live in Preston here in Melbourne. We know most people on the street.
Oh, okay, that's good.
It's a real difference in terms of, I think that's been one of the, I'm not going to pretend, you know, aspects of this lockdown are really, really hard. I'm such a social person. Man, I miss touch.
You're a hugger, that's for sure.
And I just miss that I call it the breaking of bread over a cafe or a restaurant or a friend's house, and just conversations. But I remember really early on in the, this was actually even in the first lockdown, that I was really, really struck by a noise that I heard outside, and that was the sound of children playing on the street.
Oh, okay.
I realised that I hadn't heard that sound in my neighbourhood for a long time, because everyone gets so busy, and all the children had, as soon as school finished, they had to, whether it was soccer practice or football practice, or whether it was lessons, or whatever it was, everyone was in their individual homes or situations. And suddenly I heard laughter on the streets, and I really, really enjoyed that.
Mm.
The other thing for me, just to explain to people listening, so Wayne and I were in the UK. We left on the 9th of March.
Okay.
And as soon as we got there, we realised that it was things were becoming quite dire, and it was meant to be our 35th anniversary trip.
Wow.
And we were in Scotland on the Isle of Bute, and was just listening to the news and realised we needed to get home. Absolutely, really fortunate that we managed to get a flight out on the 19th. I still remember the dates because it was so stressful. And I will never forget being in those airports. We're all, everyone's flying economy, everyone's desperate to get home. And I just remember the panic everyone felt in the airport. And you just, you were in close proximity. We were wearing masks, and that wanting to get home was so desperate in all of us. I had never quite felt about this place that sense of home that I did on that occasion. And so it was actually quite a relief when we landed in Melbourne.
Okay.
And this is fortune. It was just before hotel quarantine was announced, so we went straight to our place and quarantined for 14 days. The reason I'm referring to that is I think it kind of gave me a perspective of what was going on with pandemic globally. And I just really, really fortunate, one, that I had a house.
Yeah.
One, that I had a partner who loves me. I remember, I've written about this, my poor mum she came over and just knocked on the door and left this amazing meal, for us. And I'm saying goodbye to her, and she's just crying outside the window because we couldn't touch, and she's at the most vulnerable and at most risk of ages. So, but yes, in terms of your question, how am I finding it? I am glad I'm my age. I think it must be really hard if you're much younger. I remember what I was. I have been really humbled by a lot of my nieces and nephews, like kind of how stoic they've been. I'm really, I'm not making that up at all. I've been really genuinely touched by their grace in this period. I've been reading a lot, Margaret. I've been listening to. I've been taking out old records that I haven't listened to for 30 years.
Oh, okay.
And I've been trying to enjoy the moments of stillness.
Okay.
That have become available. I know it's really hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, you're right.
How have you?
Yeah, okay. I've been working, so just a lot of challenges at trying to balance everything, like a lot of people. But yeah, I'll just quote Brené Brown, and we'll go into a question around connection. So Brené Brown writes, "Connection is the energy that is created between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued." So with the pandemic and the changes in the ways we connect, being more physically distanced and more physically isolated from each other, what impacts, changes and challenges do you think this may have on us in the longer term?
Oh, look, one of the things you're conscious of is it's a mug's game to try and predict the future.
Yeah, true.
I saw this coming, when you. So what you have is a hope, I think. Like all of us, we've seen real problems and really disastrous problems. It's I'm not saying anything that people don't already know. The really the thing that COVID-19 has done is expose the fractures in our society. So the most, most obvious is aged care and aged health. And there clearly is there is more that the federal government needs to do in that area. It really needs to treat, looking after our community is not about making money. Right, it's actually a relationship that I think is beyond between us as citizens and the governments we choose to, and regardless of whether you vote Labor or Liberal or Green or whatever you do, that I think that responsibility we've realised needs to be taken much more seriously. But I also think for me, it seems that this moment of the pandemic is a growing awareness that I have to take those things a lot more seriously now. So a really simple thing, Margie, to make it explicit is often now I was so used to social, to texting, but if I haven't spoken to someone, I just did this the other day, someone I hadn't spoken for a while, and I know they live on their own, and I thought I just want to see how they are. I rang them.
Okay.
Rang them so we could have the human voice actually speak. It wasn't only done through text.
Yeah.
And so what I hope in the long term is that those kind of human connections, and again, like on a neighbourhood level, Catherine Murphy wrote a really excellent quarterly essay the last month, and talking about the government's responses to the pandemic. And she made the point that I just made about, I said I heard children's voices in the street, and she was saying there was an elderly neighbour who she'd lived down the road from maybe 7, 8, 9 years, never spoken to him before. She was really busy.
Yeah.
We all think we are all busy, particularly if you have children, particularly if you have care responsibilities, but it's actually taking that breath and going, I will say hello. Human connection. They're really small things. There are really big issues to confront, but I think what it's taught me these last few months is that at least what I can do in my own personal life is make those connections.
Yeah. And sometimes it is that simple thing of just smiling at, people in the street, or especially if they're elderly. Sometimes, especially during the pandemic, I've been thinking I'll make more of an effort to do that, because that might be the only connection that person gets.
Yeah.
And it's really hard now with the face masks, because people can't tell if you're actually, smiling. So I then say hello instead, in case they think I'm frowning or something. But yeah.
No, it has taught me that there is a lot of communication that you can do with the eyes.
Yes.
It's a really interesting way. Again, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish about it, as I said, and we will talk about what is difficult about this period, I'm sure. But it is those simple pleasures that I'm trying to hold onto and reflect on, like that. Wow, I've noticed people's eyes. These faces passing by on the street.
Okay. Now, I'm not sure whether it might be worth, you're kind of cutting in and out a bit. I don't know if that's for everyone, whether it's worth maybe trying a different set of earphones on, and maybe we can...
I think this is the only one, unfortunately, that's working.
That's all right. It could be you moving. Okay. Michael Kirby, the former Justice of the High Court, was on the 7:30 report last night, and he said the good thing about Australia is we have a fundamental core egalitarianism. I think we were at risk of losing it. We got to recapture the truth of fair go, which is that we share problems and share burdens. I think we've done that better in COVID-19 than I have seen for quite a few decades in my life. So he's in his 80s now. So do you think that the pandemic might help to affect a longer term attitudinal change of greater communal responsibility towards caring for those who are more vulnerable?
Look, I'm really, I think Kirby is a terrific humanitarian and a terrific intellect. And that is my hope, actually, that will happen. because I think what has happened is that we've all shared an experience, of course, in different ways, right? But it doesn't matter what age you are, it doesn't matter what gender you are, it doesn't actually matter where you are in kind of the disparate groups that form this nation called Australia. We all share an experience of the pandemic, and I think that's brought a sense of unity, which is really, really difficult to find in the contemporary world, where we're all quite separated, and social media sometimes it accelerates that sense of being different. I think, again, Margie, being away, being in the UK when the shock of the pandemic really started to hit, coming here and realising, for all our problems, and I don't want to make light of the problems we've got, there was a consensus about what do we do to ensure that the most vulnerable people are not destroyed by this pandemic. And I didn't see that in England.
Okay.
All right. And it's, you look across the Pacific to the United States, which is, like us, a largely English-speaking country formed by colonial histories, and what you see there is a selfishness that I'm so glad is not part of what we're experiencing at the moment. It's made me, again, really simple things. It's made me really glad about compulsory voting.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I do think that there is I think that that's something that I had not really thought about a lot before this pandemic, and that what it does, and because there's so much partisan politics, in social media, in the press, kind of 24-hour news cycle feeding all this, just kind of feeding a frenzy sometimes around politics. But compulsory voting requires us to find some kind of consensus as our politicians, to actually have to speak to everyone. I think that's I hadn't realised how positive a thing that is for us. Don't forget too that the pandemic came after the horrific season of bushfires as well. And I think there was a sense for me and a lot of people I know, and I've got friends all up the coast who were threatened. I love, there's the Cabargo, the town that got gutted by the fires. I've loved for the last 20 years I've been visiting, and so it was deeply distressing to see the effect of the fires on that community and that world. But I was humbled, is the word again, by the courage of those women and men fighting the fires. And again, it's maybe something we all shared, that sense of a calamity that reminds us of what it is to be human. Now, politics comes in, and there will, we still haven't got an effective climate change policy because of the stupidity of some of our parliamentary politics at times. But I think, I hope, and again, it's a hope, that what it's taught us is that there are things that we share in common.
Our common humanity. Yeah.
One of them is the environment, and one of them, we are all communities.
It's true.
It's interesting. I'll just, in this, sorry, Maggie, I'm thinking about it in response to your question. You and I both come from a Greek background, right? And, Greece is a country that I've been really lucky to go back and forth, through at times in my life, and I love Greece. And when the pandemic started, I remember thinking, Greeks are really anarchic. You go into a cafe in Athens, and it may have no smoking signs everywhere, but everyone's lighting up. It's kind of, people are quite anarchic when it comes to rules and regulations. And I thought, I wonder how they're going to deal with elements of lockdown or quarantine, and then my cousin Soteria, very, very early on in the pandemic, and she said, "Oh, everyone's obeying because she said, we can't do what Sweden has done. We can't take a risk with old people." Part of, and I thought, I'm really glad to hear that. It was, when it's really important, people are going to care about the people they love. They're going to care. They're going to care about something called community.
Yeah, great. Yeah, no, you could see that. The singer-songwriter Nick Cave wrote, "The key to living is to actively reduce each other's suffering. This is also the remedy to our own suffering, our own feelings of separateness and disconnectedness. And it is the essential antidote for loneliness." So, Christos, you are a novelist and a keen observer of the human condition. Wondering what your thoughts are on the key to living and what helps to give you meaning and purpose in your life.
Oh,
it's a big one.
I think, well, one of the things that has, the two things that come immediately to mind, and when things come immediately to mind, you're also aware that things will come to me at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'll go.
That's okay.
But it is certainly the two things that come to mind when you ask that question was love was the first one, and then art.
Okay.
You know, and for me, love is the and when I talk about love, I talk about it in not only a sense about a love that you may have for your partner, your wife, husband, love that you have for a family member, love that you have for your neighbour, love that you have for your friends. Like that is the illumination really in my life, has come from the experience of love. That's and it sounds simple because it is actually quite simple. That's just the truth of it. I think we all understand that experience, that when you are at your most broken, even if you are fortunate enough to have someone who can lay their arm across you, or you can talk to on the phone and share that care and love, then then you find a light, right? Art for me has been, and art in the general sense. So what have I done over the last few months in this pandemic? I've gone back to books. I've gone back to music I love. I've been watching films that have brought me great joy, because they're another sort of illumination. Because they a really great book, a really great film, a great piece of music will make you step into the shoes of another person. If you find some understanding of the world. You find beauty, and sometimes you find challenge. I want to be challenged by things as well. That's one of the things that I adore about art and what art can do. It can sometimes make you really bloody uncomfortable. Art doesn't always make you feel safe.
No.
And but if you have that kind of shelter of love around you, that you can go there. I'm very conscious. The last book I wrote, Damascus, was about the beginning of the Christian church, even before we even it even had a name. It wasn't, just the first men and women who took these words of a prophet who was born in Judea 2,000 years ago, was crucified by the Roman state, and whose words created a world religion. And I'm no longer Christian, but those words have been a constant in my life since I've been a small child. Particularly, I had a wonderful primary school teacher who, when a group of boys were insulting, I grew up in a city environment. It was a very migrant school. A young girl, she was a girl. We were in grade 4. Her mum had divorced, and back in the days, it was the 70s, in this migrant world, everyone started calling her mother names. She was a slut. Sorry, that was the word they were using. And I remember this teacher just created a circle of all of us and told us the story, the gospel story of Jesus coming up to the adulteress about to be stoned and saying, if you are without sin, then cast the stone. And she made us, this is what great storytelling can do, she made us feel what it was to be like to be that young woman about to have a rain of stones showered upon her. It made us all understand, even as little children, the profundity of that, of those words. And that's a moral lesson. And I'm really grateful for her. Her name is Ms. Luneman, so I'm just profoundly grateful that she taught me that lesson.
It's an important one, isn't it?
The reason I'm bringing it up in terms of your question about, and love and art is that a lot of us can't have religion anymore. We don't have faith in those in religion. Some of us do, and I'm sure a lot of people listening do. But for those of us who don't necessarily have that traditional faith, I think we do need to find ways to come to an understanding of the world and come to find a space to understand suffering in the world and to understand the care we need to extend to another in the world. And if we no longer have a religious language for that, what is the language we have? Is one of the ways we can work towards creating that kind of language.
And it's it's like that real understanding that, people might be a different colour or, come from a different country or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's our common humanity that binds us together. We're not really that different at the end of the day, But art is certainly a good way into another world and sometimes an escape from another world as well. A lot of people are watching a lot of Netflix at the moment, that's for sure.
You do need the escapes. You need to. I would, what I would say. What's been really helpful to me is to find the things that make me really joyous. It can be hard. It can be really hard missing the people you love, walking around the same 5 kilometres day after day. So, it is music. Books is one thing. Music is another thing that I adore. And so, actually sitting down and listening to old records has been a real pleasure for me. Whatever your pleasure, I think you need to pursue it. Yeah. I had a really, sorry for that, I hope I'm not going all over the place, but a question made me think. When I was just at the end of last year and the book had come out, and I was at a library in Sydney, and I was talking about how sometimes I feel really guilty talking about religion because I'm not I don't have faith in that traditional way. And I said, but I pray. I don't know who I'm praying to, but I do start the morning, Margie, every time when I get up. And you could call this meditation, or you could call it prayer. For me, they kind of blur, those two terms. I start with a thanksgiving. I remember saying at this library, I feel a little bit guilty about doing that. Have I got a right as a non-religious person? And this old Greek woman came up afterwards and tugged me at the days when you could still touch people, and tugged my sleeve, and she said, prayer is a really ancient form of dealing with anxiety.
Oh, okay.
Prayer is a really ancient form of dealing with fears. Don't be scared of it. And I think I realise that I'm really fortunate that I did, because I grew up in my parents were both Greek Orthodox, that I grew up in knowing those forms that I could fall back into them. And I thought they were really wise words that old woman spoke to me, because I think we all need to find those kind of forms of saying, one, thank you, because that there is much more there's so much misfortune out in the world. And also, I think a way of falling into a position and going, I'm scared, or I'm angry, I'm afraid, and that there isn't anything shameful about that. I actually think that she was right, they're ancient wisdoms. Every culture in the world in history has had those forms, able to deal with pain.
And I guess it's like a sharing of a burden as well. You know, it's kind of surrendering to something bigger than yourself, or just having a sense that someone's listening, maybe, or you know, that kind of thing as well. Yeah, I know. Most nights we at the dinner table will give thanks to the fact that we've got, you know, a roof over our head and we've got food. You know, and we're not particularly religious, but I just wanted the kids to grow up being grateful for that, because not everyone has got that, you know. So I just wanted them to have that kind of understanding that, and not to lose sight of giving thanks every day to that as well. Yeah. I'm just going to read out a quote from Eddie Jaku from he's a Holocaust survivor. I don't know if you've read the book. It's The Happiest Man on Earth. He's about 100 and lives in Australia. So I'll just quote, "There are always miracles in the world, even when all seems hopeless. And when there are no miracles, you can make them happen. With a simple act of kindness, you can save another person from despair, and that might just save their life. And this is the greatest miracle of all." So like many people in the community, there are many carers listening today who may be really struggling with their mental health during this time. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about a time in your life that you really struggled, and if there was someone who said or did something, an act of kindness perhaps, that really helped you in that moment.
Oh, yeah, I know. I mean, there are many, but one that always I am so deeply grateful for, and it's a friend of both of us, Chris Brophy.
Okay.
Look, when I was in my late 20s, it was not an easy period. I was, you know, I don't want to, you know, go into it, but it did have to do with battling addiction, which was my, you know, one of my burdens, you know, that we all have our burdens. And in that period, I did things that I was really deeply ashamed of. You know, not that they were violent or, you know, but, you know, they were, you know, I felt like I betrayed people who I loved. I felt like I was dishonest. And Chris, who is a generation old, well, not a generation, she's how many years? 10 years older, 12 years older than we are. I remember she just sat down and listened, and really listened. And she said to me these incredibly wise words, which was, "Chris, feeling shame is when you realise that you're an adult. That you know, we've all done shameful things." And the gift she gave me was listening, and also saying to me, "You're not alone there." You know? So now, what she steered me towards was like, don't sit in that shame, because that can be really destructive. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
You know, what it meant for me was to go and make some apologies. And there are sometimes, you know, you will apologise and it may not be welcome because you've hurt someone so deeply that you've got to, that's part of being an adult as well. But I think it's that listening, that kindness that I will never ever forget was extended in that moment. I mean, I've been really fortunate with my friends. I've been really fortunate that people have taken time to tell you that they love you. You know, it's terrible how I kind of have to stutter over those words because they sound so sentimental. I don't mean them to be. I think they're really, really important. We are all going to go into darkness. That is part of being human in this world, right? There are, for me, and I can only speak for myself in relationship to what you were asking Margie. There are two things that I've found carry me through that difficulty, that pain. One is to be thankful for the people I have who love me, for the opportunities I've had that so many other people in the world don't have, and so not to forget that. So the giving of thanks is crucial, I think, to surviving. And the other one is to not be afraid of those emotions. To say, this is what I'm experiencing. I will try to find the source of the light. The source of the light is the people you love. The source of the light, as I said, it can be a piece of music. You know, for me, it's you know, if I really want to feel my soul lift, there's a track on the Van Morrison album, Astral Weeks, called Sweet Thing, and it always brings me an indescribable joy.
Okay.
So I just put it really loud, and I hope everyone who's listening has something like that that can kind of create a ballast when the waves are,
Yeah, it can be simple things like you're saying, like music. I mean, not that music's simple really, but you know, we've all got our tracks that we, you know, either bring us undone or you know, lift our spirits and that. And I've known you for a long time, Christos, and I know that you've been a giver of hope and solace and love to a lot of people too. So you know, I'm glad to hear that you feel like you've gotten that back from other people too. But you know, whether it's in person or with what you've written and what that's created in terms of films, or you know, there's so much that you have also given to many people. So giving thanks to you there.
Oh, you're a good son. I do the first novel I ever wrote, and this, you know, when I wrote, it was called Loaded. When I wrote it, I had no idea if I could do it, and I had no idea if it was ever going to happen again, right? And the book begins with a quote from a Mexican-American writer, Richard Rodriguez, talking about responsibility of towards family. And there's he's a wonderful writer, Richard Rodriguez, and I'd come across him in my early 20s. And like you and I, he was born to a migrant family. Him in the US is a Mexican family, we to Greek parents. What remained with me, has remained with me all through these decades about Rodriguez's writing, is that it can be a certain burden being the second generation child of migrant parents, because they have come to a world, they may not speak the language. That's certainly true for my parents. It's on the other side of the planet. It's not, and there are certain responsibilities that were there that were sometimes frightening. It's Carers Week, right? I, from a very, very young age, was taken, we all have this experience, and anyone listening to this who comes from a migrant background will have this experience where you go with your mother or your father to the doctors, and you may be 7 or 8 years old, and you have to interpret, right? And that's quite a huge responsibility for a young child. You don't want to get it wrong. And the Greek I grew up with was a very basic Greek. I didn't know I didn't know for these conditions. Later in an adolescence, knowing that I was gay, it was, you know, I knew that would be a really painful experience for my parents, because they didn't grow up in the world I grew up in, where sexuality was something you heard about, or, you know, that you could read about. But all through those really difficult moments and times, and you were part of it there for a while, you know, when you were there, you saw it, but they never gave up their love for me. And I hope, and I didn't give up my love for them. That it wasn't easy. I don't want to, but that sense of responsibility, which felt like a burden when I was really young, now I feel like it has been a gift, because it taught me that we all have responsibilities to one another. That's what was so in one way, through all the pain of my father passing away, that I could have the opportunity to say thank you and return the gift in a small way. I'm really grateful for that. I think learning about, that sense of responsibility to one another is really, really important.
It is part of community too. What has helped you to retain a sense of hope during a difficult time in your life? You might have touched on this already.
Yeah, but I mean, we have, in a sense, that it is that remembering your fortune, it's being aware of the people who you love. It's the books. I think, and in a way, this pandemic has made me remember this again, Margie. I think I think I've learned this at different points in my life, but certainly the last year has been a recalling of it. Sometimes it's really good to switch off and stay in silence or we are so fortunate we've got Zoom, so we can see each other,
still connect
in the lockdown. But one of the dangers, I think, of something like social media is that you can be wired 24/7 to information coming in the world, right? And I think we've got to learn how to say, okay, I'm going to put that away for a while, right? I was talking to a friend the other day who's a wonderful filmmaker, and he was talking about how anxious he'd become because he'd been on Twitter all the time.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then he decided to just go off it. And he said this calmness returned.
Oh, okay.
And I think we have to become, and your children probably know this because they've grown up with it, whereas you and I haven't. But and this has got to do with hope. Like, where do I feel hopeful at times is I go, there's an opportunity with this technology to finally hear things that I've been wanting to hear for a really long time. Maybe I don't need to hear the 24-hour news cycle. Need to that maybe I can take 3 or 4 days and just listen to a symphony or a piece of music I've wanted to listen. To give you a concrete example, I've got my MP3 player, and I when I do my walk around my 5 kilometres, I had read this book about Barack Obama, and he talked in the book. He references that one of the most pivotal thinkers in his life was a man, early 20th century, late 19th century, called William James, who had a philosophy called pragmatism. I'd never heard of this guy, right? I mean, and I thought I'd like to know more about it. And so I went on the web, and because of what technology can bring us, there's actually, you can hear the book being read by people. It's in the public domain. So I've been walking around my neighbourhood listening to this philosophy, and it's been really inspiring. Of course, it inspired someone like Obama. The reason I'm mentioning it is that I think we need to be hopeful, to retain hope. Sometimes you have to be very, very astute on how to cut away what I'll call the white noise. Just to remember that what happens in the 24-hour news cycle isn't the end of, that there are things in the past that are important to recall. There are times when you actually need to shut off. When we were young, there were times we needed to turn off the television. I think there are times when you need to turn off the computer. There are times when you need to turn off the phone. And when you sit in that silence, that's when hope comes for me.
Okay.
It's in those moments that I feel most hopeful, because I'm doing something I really want to do. It's like it feels like it belongs to me. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I guess you're reconnecting with yourself, and it's not all about all the outside externals. It's kind of something from within. Yeah. What has your own life experiences taught you about resilience?
That again, that we're not, we're not islands. That resilience is easier when you've got people around you. It has that. It's worth taking a risk, Margaret. I think that's what my life has taught me. That there's that it is actually, taking a risk. The risk may be to say, I will choose to, let's make it concrete, because it's really the risk of going, I love my parents, I'm going to trust, no matter how bloody hard it is, that they will deal with my sexuality, and they will, that I can do that. The risk at my mid-20s, we were working together to go, I've got a great job, but I'm not happy because there's this little dream inside me. Not little dream, it was a huge dream. I want maybe I will start working part-time and see if that's possible. Those two risks, and they felt, they were risks. Maybe I didn't have any talent. It wasn't going to happen, but it was a risk worth taking. And so I'm really, I'm someone who would say that do not be scared of those kind of risks. Having said that, I know I was really fortunate that I had a partner who, when I said, I think I want to write a book, but who went, okay, let's work out how we're going to live to support that, which means not necessarily living in the suburb you want to live. The kind of material life that you want to have, because taking a risk means that you have to take certain sacrifices as well. Sacrifices are worth it. Resilience is about being prepared to make sacrifices, I think, Margaret. Actually, that I would say, again, I'll probably at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'll wake up and go.
Maybe you can email us and we can post it.
But I do think that that's an important lesson for me.
Okay, thank you. We've probably only got about 7 minutes before we take questions, but I just thought I'd read out this quote that I think a lot of carers today might resonate with them. And then the question I'll ask you, you may or may not have already answered, but we'll see how we go. So Julia Baird, in her book Phosphorescence, writes, "How do we continue to glow when the lights turn out? All we can really do is keep placing one foot on the earth, then the other, to seek out ancient paths and forests, certain in the knowledge that others have endured before us. We must love, and we must look outwards, and at all times, caring for each other, seeking wonder and stalking awe every day to find the magic that will sustain us and fuel the light within, our own phosphorescence." So Christos, I'm wondering what helps you fuel the light within your own phosphorescence. You may have already touched on this anyway, but
hearing you read that section out, Margie, and I think it's connected to the question about hope, right? So look, this is another gift that Chris Brophy, who we were talking about, gave me. She sent me when I was starting off being a writer, she sent me this wonderful quote by the American writer Tobias Wolff, who, from a book of his called In Pharaoh's Army, which was his memoir about being a young American soldier in the war in Vietnam. And in, I'm going to paraphrase it, in it, Tobias Wolff, who I think is a wonderful writer, talked about how in learning to write, he learned how to save his own life. And for me, I have found I feel really grateful that writing has been a way of my making sense of the world, right? And that by being able to sometimes put the really difficult stuff, the really hard stuff, the really confusing stuff, the really painful stuff into words, I find a way of not letting it overwhelm me.
Okay.
I think that's one of the great experiences of art. So what I would, how do you learn really early on, when I made that decision to write, that did I have a book in me, right? I'd been writing since I was a young boy, but did I have a book in me? I had to make a timetable, and I had to, and I decided these 2 days I was going to write, and in those 2 days I wasn't going to watch. When I was sitting down for, and I started really small, 2 days of 4 hours each. I was going to sit down and write, and I was going to dedicate myself to that. And I was, no matter how enticing the thought of going and having a coffee with a friend was, I was going to do that, or switching on the television to watch an old Hollywood movie. I was going to write. And like Tobias Wolff said, I found in that act of writing a way of, it sounds quite dramatic, but it felt like that at the time, of saving my life, of moving towards the light, not. And I think all of us, you don't have to be a writer, you don't have to be an artist, but I think they're fine putting aside, even if it is to begin with, 45 minutes in your week, to go, do I love cooking? I'm going to try something new with cooking. Do I love painting? I've never studied art. I love, but there's something about the act of painting or drawing that gives me solace or pleasure. I'm just going to do that for, whether you begin at 45 minutes or 3 hours, anyone listening knows their own responsibilities, and particularly if you're a carer, you may not have a lot of time. But I think it's really important to make that space and do something like that. And I think sitting in that space and no matter how hard it is, actually putting your phone away, looking at it, like for, just being able to say, I'm going to sit and do this thing that I love.
And
it's going to be, is hopeful for me.
Yeah, that's great. And it's also about that thing of whatever you create in that time, whether it's a meal or you write in a journal or you paint, or no one else can create that. You're the only person that will create that. So it's about honouring that within yourself, whether it's, it's not always about the finished product. It's about the relationship with yourself and to creativity, and whether it's mindfulness or, whatever people might call it, just something that's honouring something within yourself and giving expression to it. That's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, just as you were saying that, Margie, that great, I can't remember his name, but he was in the mid-20th century in Sydney, that old man who wrote
Eternity. Yeah, I can't remember his name.
For people who there's a beautiful film by Lawrence Johnson, an Australian filmmaker, which I'm sure you can source on one of the streaming platforms, or called Eternity. And he was this man, deeply religious, deeply political, who went around Sydney just chalking the word eternity. And it became, it was his passion. It was his way of bringing light to take your metaphor into the world. And what's wonderful when you see the documentary is that there are a lot of people just, people doing it really hard. We're talking the mid-20th century in the Cross, in Sydney, in King's Cross, a woman talks about just seeing the word in the morning gave her hope.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It was because it was someone taking their passion and giving it to the world. Arthur, someone thank you for that. reminding me of the name. I'm terrible.
Yes. Oh, that's right. Thank you. Well, we've gotten to 2 o'clock. I'm just wondering, Mick, have we got any questions from carers?
We have got many questions.
Oh, okay.
Now, I'll just see if my video's gone a
Thank
little
you.
bit funny.
Thank you, Christos.
Oh, my camera does not want to look very good, but that's okay. We'll improvise. So, Christos, there's quite a few really interesting questions that have come through from everyone. So those of you who have contributed questions, thank you very much. And Christos, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts.
Yeah.
Quite a number of people have made very supportive comments, which we can share with you later.
Pleasure. Really, thank you for this.
A couple of interesting questions sort of around the pandemic, perhaps. First, one, Christine has said, can you discuss the pandemic of grief regarding COVID-19 carers excluded from nursing homes and end-of-life situations?
Oh, look, I think it's been, I've got friends who've lost parents to COVID, and that's just been a really, really difficult situation that I think we haven't talked about enough as a society. I don't think governments have talked enough about how to deal with people's experience of grief. I've got someone who's, again, I'm careful, I don't want to give names, but whose child went into hospital at the beginning of the second lockdown, and they weren't, it was really difficult even to see their child. And those griefs are going to take a long time to deal with, right? And I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert, but just being with, talking to friends who've undergone this experience, it is going to, I hope that the governments on both a state and a federal level are going to start putting things in place for the long-term work that needs to be done to give people an opportunity to come to terms with grief. Because as we all know, anyone who's lost someone who's close to them, grief is not, grief takes time, and grief, what I discovered with my father's passing was, again, I was really grateful that that there was in orthodoxy certain rituals that allowed me to express grief. So for 40 days, and Dad's buried at Preston Cemetery, so quite close to where I live. For 40 days, someone goes to the grave and lights a candle to the departed soul. And, because I'm the closest, and it was, for 40 days, nothing else mattered but that act, which was a way of me communicating something about my grief. What COVID's done is rip those rituals and those expressions away from us. I was talking to a friend, and for people who are experiencing this at the moment, she's a really wise woman, and her father passed away, and what she and her family have decided to do is that as soon as it's possible to have those rituals in place then, and I think, again, I'm going to be cautious here because I'm not a public health expert by any means. I'm just one other person in the world. But I do think when I was speaking to my friend that made a lot of sense to go, okay, this doesn't mean we can't do this. It will just have to be at a future date. But I think those two things need to be on an individual level, to kind of think forward into the future and go, this is how we're going to express this grief when it's possible. And then on a social level, to all of us be really acutely aware that the pandemic doesn't end with the end of lockdown, or that there are people who are going to need a lot of support because of what they've been through, because it has been hellish. Like, it broke me to see my mother outside the window, and not being able to hug her. I don't want to imagine what it's like for people who've been through that experience of having someone they love who's passed away over this period.
Thank you. Yeah, so probably picking up from that point actually fits kind of nicely. So Evan says, Christos, you have an incredible talent in capturing the essence of Melbourne in your writing. And he asked, how do you think Melbourne has changed and will change as a city as a result of the pandemic?
Well, Evan, it's a bit like what I said before in the talk. Just so nervous about predictions at the moment, because it's like the way of telling you that the future you imagined is very the future is very different to the future that you've imagined. I think so. This is more hope, right? I'm not going to pretend that I know this will happen. I do hope that we've all become aware of how important our local communities are. That we're just more aware of our own spaces, and that I hope that when things start to open up, people, this is a hope, people will go, maybe it'll cost me 50 cents more, but I will go and try and get something from the local shops, because these people have done it really, really hard. I think that one of the things that was really difficult about Melbourne before the pandemic was the sense that it was becoming really unequal. And it was most clear in geography, that they felt like there were like two cities emerging, one, the inner city and then the outer city. And that there was, I hope that COVID has made us aware that that we shouldn't be such an unequal city in where resources are, in how we live. I think there will be changes, but Evan, I'm not really. I'm not. I'm not someone who's comfortable with predicting the future. It's made me aware that I really like where I am, and that's a good thing. Actually, it's I'm not. I feel like it's with a question like that. It's the easiest thing for me to do is kind of turn it into a political answer, right? But I'm going to. What this pandemic has shown me is there are ways of living my life that I need to change. That I was traveling too much. I was taking what I've got here for granted, and so I hope, touch wood, I hope that when things are no longer under the sway of the pandemic, that I haven't forgotten those lessons.
Great, thank you. One that you've kind of touched on, I guess, at different points, but maybe you can expand on a little bit. LGBTIQA carers has asked, as a carer and a gay man, do you find there are additional things to navigate compared to straight friends who have a caring role?
There are the, things that it's a really good question, and it's a really hard question. I know, for example, we've talked about my father's death and being a carer over that period when he was sick. Like navigating some of the social, familial, not in the immediate family. I'm not talking about my brother or my mother or the cousins I'm closest to, but that there were expectations about kind of some of the religious rituals that didn't include a same-sex partner, or didn't they? So you find yourself having to defend your life sometimes at the points where you're most vulnerable, where really what you want to do is just be in your grief. And I do remember there was one moment at the wake where one of my uncles was starting a political discussion, and it happened to be around kind of same-sex marriage and stuff. And I just said, this is not the time, you know, and he was anti it. And I said, this is not the time to have that discussion, right? It's just, it's a moment of grief for all of us. I'm really happy, and I am really happy to sit down and argue till 3 o'clock in the morning if we need to, but you've got to, you need to be respectful of the situation. So I think when I heard the question, that was the first thing that came into mind. I think generally with the question of how we look after each other and how we age has a certain urgency for queer people in terms of, you know, I think we need to create more nursing homes that are going to be respectful of the fact that we're not all straight, you know, that somehow, and that just because we turn 80 doesn't mean our sexuality ends, you know, and the kind of life and conversations we want to have and experiences we want to have. So those are specific concerns for elderly queer people, but they're part of a general whole about how do we talk about age and how do we age in this society.
Great, thank you. So another question Anonymous asks, really getting into your writing, and says, so they're interested in how you commence your writing projects. And so do you start by preparing an outline of each chapter, or do you just sit and it flows from beginning to end?
Look, one thing I'll say is that every book can be a little bit different, right? There's a great phrase that I've stolen from the great writer Doris Lessing, and she talks about fugging time, Fugging, which is when you're just sitting and you're thinking about what might be a story or what might be a book. And that time when it looks like you're absolutely doing nothing but sitting on your couch can be, or just taking a walk down the road, can be the most important part, because that's when the characters come or the situation comes to you. I'm someone, and every writer will be different, I'm someone who doesn't feel like a book's begun until I've heard a voice of a character. And once I've heard the voice, then I will sit down and start doing a general map, but the map is very, very loose. It's just, I found with my first novel that it's really easy to lose direction. And so instinctively, and it was an instinctive choice around structure, I remember thinking, well, look, this 19-year-old, because that was the main character, could speak forever. So how do I get from a beginning to an end? And I decided I was going to make it a 24-hour story. And as I said, that was almost instinctual, but it taught me that structure is really important in a novel. That, you know, but you don't have to be wet up. But I'm not someone who sits down and goes, chapter 1, this is what's going to happen. Chapter 2, this is what's going to happen. Chapter 3 is going to happen. I just have broad strokes. Damascus was a little bit different in that I knew I wanted to write about the early church, and what I did was, and it's a bit what we were talking about, Margie, where I found joy is I didn't write for a year. I just sat and read ancient history and philosophy and theology and the Bible, and and for a year I felt like I was a student, and it was the most exciting. It was one of the most exciting periods of my life to be lost in that world. So I guess in a roundabout way, what I'm saying is that there's no law. The only rule that has been important for me and has kept me writing is that I try and write at least 1,500 words a day. Because it's really, discipline is one of the hardest things to achieve as an artist. That, you know, I often will come to the end of the day and go, that was a lot of crap, Tsiolkas, but it keeps me writing.
Excellent, thank you. And that one that John asked a question, which you kind of touched on earlier. He said he's just read your first novel, Loaded, and he said, "Is there a particular worldview you intended to convey when writing it? And if so, has that changed at all since you wrote that book?"
Oh yeah, because that was 25 years ago. So it's been interesting, John, because there's going to be an audio. I was asked to adapt Loaded for the stage for the Malthouse here in Melbourne with a wonderful writer called Dan Giovannoni. And we did the play and then COVID happened, so it's now going to be an audio play. So it was interesting to return to this character that I'd written 25 years ago, who's 19, and I'm far, far from 19 now. And of course I've changed. Of course I've become. I think I've become more. In some ways, I've become more careful, which is, I think, something that happens with age. I'm an old man looking back at this 19-year-old, and I couldn't do this when I was writing it in my 20s, and I'm feeling really tender to him, and I would just keep wanting to go, "Oh, be careful! Don't take so many drugs. Don't put So that I have a perspective that comes, and I'm not scared of age. I think there are great. I will never, ever again write a novel like Loaded, because no one ever writes. There's something exciting about the first novel you ever write, because you don't know if you're ever going to do it again, and you feel like you want to put everything about the world and everything you know into a first novel. And that's never, ever going to happen again. So what did I want to say about the world back then? That it was a really, really confusing place. That how do you negotiate class and sexuality and gender and migration and all this history? How do you do it and keep yourself not falling into an abyss? And I think Ari, as a character, having returned to him after such a long time, I really like his fiery will. I think some people have called the novel nihilistic. I don't, reading it again, and I'm not someone who reads my stuff, but I had to do it for this play. I don't think it's nihilistic, because Ari actually does care for people. He may not know how to express that, but I don't think a lot of people at 19 do know how to express that properly. But he actually is. There are real moments of kindness in the novel, and it was good to remember that. But yeah, God, I kept worrying for him.
And it's interesting in the way you've described Ari there. And so Yolanda asks, and we're probably getting towards the end of our time, but maybe as a final one,
your questions, that's absolutely fine.
Your writings look at individual learning. Your writings look at individual learnings about themselves, and which character in your works best relates to you?
Ooh. There's Ari, in a way, was an alter ego that I create. He's not me, it's not an autobiographical novel, but it has elements of who I am in it. And so there's a lot of Ari in me, and there's a little bit of me in Ari, if that makes sense. When you're creating these characters, they come from this strange relationship, which is the real world, and we are like, we poachers, writers and artists. We take from, sometimes there's a character in the Slap called Connie, who really is a young woman I saw on a tram in Northcote, you know, and she fascinated me for whatever reason, and she became a character in the book. But she's also me as a young teenager. So there's imagination and there's the real, and that's kind of the contest in when you write. So the short answer is it's hard to separate your characters and go which one is Christos, because I can see elements of myself in a lot of them. I was even going to say with Damascus, I was going to say that there's a character who is Jesus' twin, Thomas, in that novel, that is really close to who I am now. But he's also a character that maybe I wish I could be, if that makes sense. It's too simplistic to say they're your children. It's not that at all. But because they come from the imagination, so they come from up here, there is a relationship you have towards them that is really, and you can see it in my response now, it's one of the hardest things you can ask a writer, actually, because it's almost like you're talking about, they're not children, but there's some relationship to family in them. And you don't want to bag your family.
Excellent. Look, one that is in here, which I think is probably an interesting place to wrap things up, is what are you working on at the moment, or what are you writing about at the moment?
Two things really. As soon as I came, right at the beginning, talking about coming into quarantine from the UK, I thought it was going to be an essay, but I made this vow to myself that I was just going to, first thing I would do when I got up in the morning was sit down and write at least 800 words a day on this thing that I thought was going to be an essay about writing, because there's a big conversation in the writing world at the moment about who has a right to tell stories, how do we, what stories can you tell? And I thought, what do I think about these questions? How do I address them? And so March 20th, I'm back in the country. March 21st, I start writing this, 800 words a day, except that I take Sunday off because I think there is great wisdom in the old traditions. And I finished the first draft of it last week, and it was 104,000 words. And what began as an essay has become a book about writing. I haven't read it yet. I've given myself a week off, partly because I knew I was doing this, but I'm going to pick it up and read it on Monday. And part of me is really excited to see what I've written over the, and part of me is a bit scared that I'll go, oh, well, that was a good exercise, and put it in the bottom drawer. I'm being quite genuine. I don't know what it is yet. But it felt really exciting writing it. And to that other person's question, it's a way I've never quite worked before, which is that, like, absolutely no structure. I just let I just woke up in the morning and did at least 800 words and went from there. And then I've started a much more conventional, if you like, novel that I've been working on as well. So I've been balancing those two books.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I think that's probably a perfect place to close the conversation. I'll just introduce Juliana Reisler, who's our Manager of Carer Services here at Mary Carer Services, to wrap up and close the session. So thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and thanks for everyone for listening.
Christos and Margie, it's just been such a delight to listen to the conversation between the two of you. And I just felt, looking at you and listening to you, that friendship, you've had for decades, and the trust between you has really come through in it. It's been very, just to use a word if you've used it, but it's been very humbling, and it's been very touching and just really beautiful. And Christos, your ability to speak about such profound things, it's just amazing. And I think everyone who listened today will have been touched by the things you spoke about and by that conversation. So thank you just so very much. It's been so appreciated that you came along. Margie, thank you so much for enabling this, because of the friendship you have with Christos.
Thank you.
And a big thank you to the team who organized Carers Week this year. A very different Carers Week. A beautiful one after all, I think. However, we're all looking forward to a Carers Week where we can get together again physically and touch each other and have a lunch together and sit down together. But yeah, this year it's been a bit more virtual, but it's still been very nice. There is one more event happening tomorrow, 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, a resilience seminar and a webinar. You can still register for that, and I think Mick will circulate the link. So it's on the Mary website, and you can still register and come along. And if you can't make it tomorrow at 11, it'll be online for a while, I understand, on demand. We also had an event yesterday, a cooking class with Paolo, which I heard was really successful and very well received. That's also available in stream as of next Monday. So again, check out our website. So just that all of those who haven't, or who still have some appetite for more Carers Weeks events, there's something you can still look at and listen to. Big thank you to all of those who participated today. So all of you carers, I can't see you, but I know you're there. You ask questions. I can see your comments. This is what it was about. It was about you, and thank you all for coming along, for your beautiful questions, for enabling this conversation.